the Royal Stockholm Opera House called the Kungli Opera in Swedish. I love this. I love operas, ballets, Latin music and salsa. So this is like I love this place. Yes, this is the Royal Stockholm, Sweden Royal Opera House called Kungli Opera in Swedish or Svenska. And today is a showing of Romeo and Juliet, all-time classic. It's a Shakespeare's play, and that has been adapted into opera and ballet. Today was the show of the ballet, so it's spectacular. This was a the composer is called was a Russian composer called Prokofiev, Sergei Prokofiev. This is about 1935, so about a century old, and it's really fantastic. The same this because we know Romeo and Juliet has been adapted into films. The subplot and plots are into films, and then you have the opera. You also have the ballet. Everything is fantastic. The dresses are fantastic. As we know, opera is music plus acting or singing, and ballet is music plus dancing and acting. So this opera is fantastic. The dresses were fantastic. The dances were fantastic. So they are all magicians. I would call musicians the magicians, and ballet the magicians, and then of course Romeo and Juliet is all-time favorite. It's really fantastic, and I love this opera house. I love operas, ballets, Latin music, and salsa, and I love this. I'm a regular at this place. Swedish opera house called the Kungli Opera in Swedish Svenska, and this is a spectacular opera house. I love this. I'm a regular at this. Because I love operas, ballets, Latin music and salsa. So operas and ballets, I always come here. And today is a showing of the ballet form of Romeo and Juliet, Sergei Prokofiev's Russian classic, and then Kenneth Macmillan's Magic, because this was premiered at the Royal Opera House in London, Royal Ballet and Opera, and now we are seeing at the Stockholm Opera House. Everything was spectacular. The sets, the dances, music. The musicians are magicians and the dancers are magicians. And the lighting, sound, everything is spectacular. This is the Royal Opera House in Stockholm, and today we have the premiere of Romeo and Juliet, the ballet of Romeo and Juliet. Of course, Stockholm Opera House has the name is Kungli Opera and Royal Swedish Opera House, but it plays both operas, ballets, and concerts. And during the summer, also some few special concerts and so on. So the Romeo and Juliet is a spectacular, really spectacular ballet. Basis from from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And if you really look at this is a ballet that's been around since 1935. And this is the composer is Prokofiev, Sergei Prokofiev, a Russian composer. In operas and ballets, you have the music, and the operas is music with singing, and ballet is music with dancing. And you have composers. The name of the composer is usually famous for the ballet or the opera. Like in opera we call Verdi's Rigoletto or Verdi's La Traviata. Giuseppe Verdi was an Italian composer. So similarly in ballet you have the name of the composer. Composer is the one who would have composed the original music, right? Usually most of these popular and classic operas and ballets are hundreds of years old. Usually spanning anywhere from few decades before to this 20th century to 300-400 years, and that's the reason the composers are like forever, because they have composed the music, such spectacular music years, centuries back. So this was premiered in 1935, and Soviet premiere was in 1945, so probably it was a bit revised a bit. And if you look at the background and premiere of this opera, now this ballet, sorry. In Romeo and Juliet, the original play by Shakespeare, involving the two families, the clash between the two families of Verona, and and then how they fell in love, and how finally it's a tragedy. Most of the operas and are tragic, and of course this is a ballet. This is also tragic, but So what is the music is Sergei Prokofiev, and this is based on the Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, and this was premiered in 1935, 1938 and so it was premiered at Brno. Brno is in Czech Republic today. Today's Czechoslovakia. It was by Czechoslovakia together before, and then right. So looking at then of course you have the Kirov. Kirov is a ballet house in St. Petersburg, Russia. St. Petersburg is Russia. The Kirov ballet or Mariinsky Theatre is very famous for ballets. Russian ballets, and So the East Europe part of especially Europe, and particularly the Eastern Europe, has these dances, traditional dance and ballets are so fantastic. I mean, I really love those kind of Giselle or Manon or Meyerling or all these spectacular ballets. And this ballet especially, so that's the reason Europe, especially the East Europe, has these great ensembles. I mean, sometimes hundreds of people will be there on the stage and delivering the a ballet, or the of course the opera is famous throughout Europe. Many operas are in Italian, German, French, Spanish, and so on. And of course English is generally, operas are very few in English. I mean, the popular ones, especially I mean, I can think of this Jeptha by there's such kind of English operas. But of course ballets, the mainstream ballets, they represent many themes, and this is like an then this ballet has had many revivals of a ballet or an opera is in a situation in which the original ballet or opera is actually taken into because usually music is rarely modified. I mean, you will have 100% of the original music that has been composed years before, but what is generally seems modified is the choreography in the ballet, or the costumes, choreography, and all this stuff. They are revived many times. So that's the reason you will find these had many revivals, especially the one that's today is probably Kenneth Macmillan, the revived at the Royal Ballet and Opera at London, which was called the Royal Opera House in London. So this is one of the most fantastic revivals. I mean, Kenneth Macmillan's Romeo and Juliet is really very kind of the very fantastic. Right, and then he was a dance choreographer at the London Royal Opera. And then of course the music instrumentation pit is very big today. There would be more than 50 people in the pit. I mean, usually it is that number, but today the pit is really full. I mean, if you really look at the musical pit, the pit is really full today. And then of course the different instrumentation that they use are in right. And then the woodwinds like piccolo, flutes, oboes, corangles, clarinets, bass clarinet, saxophones, bassoons, contrabasson, and brass instruments, horns, trumpets. You'll find, because a lot of royal and that stuff. So you find a lot of horns, trumpets, cornet, trombones, tuba, and percussion instruments like drums, xylophone, triangle, woodblock, maracas, tambourine, shime, cymbals, bass drum, and these are all the percussion instruments. And for the keyboards like piano, celesta, and organ, and I really don't know many of these instruments. Bowed strings instrument. And then if you really look at the structure, right, like there is the act 1, and the scene is like introduction, then how do we say, Romeo, the Street Awakens. If you really look at the because I had seen the opera part of it, opera is really nice. I mean, it's French actually, and on the opera part is in, because the libretto is in French, of course it's a ballet, so there will not be any words or singing, but only music and the dancing. So on the street there is a street scene, and then morning dance. If you right, and then the fight, there is a quarrel, right, between Thibaut and his associates and others. And then scene 2 is of course the prince gives the order and stops the fight, kind of the interlude. And then scene 2 starts with preparing for the ball. Juliet and nurse, Juliet as a young girl, arrival of the guests, masks. Masks is one of the most important things, because the setting for this Romeo and Juliet in Shakespeare's play likely happens in Verona. And in Verona you also have the balcony where the famous balcony scene where Romeo gives the bouquet to Juliet. And so Juliet as a young girl, arrival of the guests, and then masks are also very important part of this. Right, and then you have the so preparing, and then the arrival of the guests, and the street. The scene 2 is kind of the arrival of the guests, then masks, and dance of the nights, and then Juliet's variation, and this. Then you have the scene 2, and masks, and then dance of the nights, and the act 2 Act 2 begins with the scene 3, like the folk dance. Romeo and Mercutio is kind of and then dance of 5 couples, dance with mandolins. The nurse gives Romeo the note from the Juliet. And then scene 4 is Romeo at Friar Lawrence's place, and then Julieta is also at Friar Lawrence, because Friar Lawrence kind of then marries them off. And scene 5 is the people continue to make merry, the folk dance, and then Tybalt meets Mercutio. Tybalt and Mercutio fight, and death of Mercutio, and Romeo decides to avenge Mercutio's death. Yeah. Act 3, kind of the scene 6 in Act 3 starts with the scene 6, and Romeo and Juliet are in Juliet's bedrooms. Then farewell before parting, the nurse, and then Julio refuses to marry Paris, because Paris was the original kind of the suitor, that was decided, and then Julio refuses to marry Paris, and then Juliet is alone. Interlude. And then scene 7 is at the Friars Lawrence's, and then interlude, and scene 8 is again in Juliet's bedroom. Juliet is alone, mourning the serenade, and then dance of the girls with lilies, and at Julius' bedside. So this completes the Act 3. So this way it proceeds, and finally we really look at the so these are there are 4 acts, and then finally it ends with the Julius death. And then some of the key orchestral suits that are taken from the work is, of course, in the scene suit 1 from the is a folk dance, the scene, the madrigal, the minuet, the masks, the Romeo and Juliet, balcony scene, and love dance, and scene 2 is from Romeo and Juliet, that is Montagues and Capulets. These are the 2 families that were warring families within Verona. They're like sworn enemies of each other. And then the Montagues and Capuleti families, and Juliet as an angry Friar Lawrence dance, Romeo dance with the girls with their eyes, Romeo at the fountain, and then so if you really look at this, right, and of course Romeo on the fountain, morning dance, and 10 pieces of piano, and then of course there has been many recordings of this, and then so this is basically the Romeo and Juliet, the forever kind of the romantic story, the classic romantic story. This Romeo and Juliet has got into it's of course the original Shakespeare's drama, then which are made into countless films have this theme of Romeo and Juliet, part of this plot, or in which 2 lovers or their families kind of reject their love, or their love makes their love failure. And so it's in the form of the original drama that was written by Shakespeare in the 15th 16th century kind of, and the sort of 16th 17th century when Shakespeare lived. And then you have the in the form of the opera and this ballet, and this is really spectacular. The ballet is really the costumes, when we do really look at the opera house, the lightings, these lightings, and the sets were so nice. Everything was so nice. I mean, the lights, the sound, the set, the opera, as I always keep saying, opera is music with singing, and ballet is music with dancing, and musicians are magicians, the singers in an opera are magicians, and then the dancers in a ballet are magicians, and then so, and of course the technical personnel who man the lights, the sound systems, they so much, I mean really so many light and sound systems, and of course the opera house is ultimate spectacular. This is so Romeo and Juliet is one of the most spectacular, whether you take it like a play, or of course play is very plain, but incorporated in the movies, in different movies, I mean. And then of course the opera and ballet are the most spectacular forms of Romeo and Juliet. I really love this ballet and opera as well. This ballet is one of the best ballets, like Giselle Manon, Meyerling, Don Quixote, all the ballets are so fantastic. I mean, the screens that are pulled down, the sceneries, and the sets, and everything is spectacular. Everyone is really a magician. I mean, this is super magic environment and experience.